An event mesh is a data movement fabric, right? So it's the network, but it's the layer between the network and the applications. So if I explain it a little bit further, Event Broker is this technology that allows you to move data in a one to many manner, in a publish to subscribe manner, right? So for example, if an order is created and we say that order event is published to the event broker, that order may have to go to the order management system. It may also go to the digital receipt system. It may also go to the loyalty system. So the same order has to go to multiple systems. And this pattern is called publish subscribe, which is done by an event broker.
Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to the Asia Tech Podcast. Sumeet Puri, the Chief Technology Solutions Officer at Solace, is with us today. I am mumbling and stumbling. I love it. Sumeet, thank you so much for coming on the show. How are you doing today?
Very good, Michael. Very nice to be on the show, and thanks for having me. Really good to talk to you.
It is my complete pleasure. Look, before we jump into the main part of this conversation, let's give the listeners a little bit of your background for some context, yeah?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Sumeet. I'm based in Singapore. I've been here for about 23 years.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
Chief Technology Solutions Officer at Solace. What that means is that I work with various enterprises, B2B scenarios, B2G scenarios, G2B scenarios, basically helping organizations move their data in real time, helping their integration better. And by training, I'm an architect, software engineer and a software architect. Worked with companies like TIBCO, BA Systems, and Singapore Ministry of Defense over the years.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, sometimes tinker and write some code.
Sometimes I write some code.
Yeah.
Do you miss writing code?
I do actually. I really do. So I don't get to write code as a part of my job.
Right.
There's just not enough time. But I do some tinkering. So one of the recent things I did was we're a family of cricket lovers, and there's this IPL which is going on. So for my son to get him interested into computer science a little, we wrote a little program which is screen capture ability of scorecards, which captures the real time score. And if our team has hit a six or has taken a wicket and is doing well, the smart lights in my living room basically listen to that and they go crazy. So that's a little hack that we did. Again, real time information. As it happens, the house needs to respond.
I was going to say, how old is your son, if you don't mind me asking?
He's 17.
Oh my God. Okay. That's great. What a great experience. And I love the fact that you've integrated, this is like such a great segue, your house into the experience of writing the code, and
Yeah.
keeping your son involved actually makes it a family affair, which makes it really cool. Can you talk to me a little bit about maybe some TEPCO experience and why you think real-time data just at scale actually matters? And then let's talk to about it in the context of Solace. Yeah.
Definitely. See, we we're used to real time in the real world, but
Yeah.
not so much in the digital world, because as computer systems evolved, networks were traditionally weak, right? So why do we need real time data? And I'll get to networks, right? So uh, when you make a payment, do you want to
Yep.
get the receipt instantly, right? When you order something online, do you want to track that order instantly in real time? Do you want to see whenever you want to see where that order is? If you're a business leader, do you want to see the state of your business whenever you want, or do you want to wait for a weekly, monthly, quarterly report as to how the business is doing? And again, your background, Michael, capital markets, when
Yeah.
price ticks, so US dollar to Singapore dollar ticks in New York, do you want to have that price available to you instantly in real time so that
Yeah.
you know what you're going to trade? So real time information, no matter what use case you look at, this cricket score, I want it in real time so that my lights can respond and I can celebrate. So we all want real time experience for better customer experience, better business decisions, more insights, and even better innovation. And that's the need for it. But we were challenged historically, and it's been getting incrementally better. But when I was growing up, or when I studied Fortran 77 in school,
Fortran.
again, giving my age a little,
I like it.
basically in that era, disk was much faster than network, right? Networks practically
Yep.
don't exist. Internet just started to happen. So to move information at scale in real time, the underlying physics of the computer system hadn't evolved sufficiently to make it happen. So computers and applications programs were written in a way that you leverage a lot of disk, right? So you write to disk, you read from disk, and you don't get to move information in real time.
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of stuff was actually put in memory as well to make stuff faster too,
Exactly.
right? Because the memory was actually faster than the network as well. Can I ask you this though? Um, Actually, I want to go back and talk about like as technological transformation, if you don't
Sure.
mind. And I want to go really far back. When I was a kid, I lived in New Jersey, but my favorite sports teams were in Boston, and I waited every day for the newspaper to come in the morning so I could run outside to the front yard and pick up the newspaper to see the scores. Right? I didn't have a radio in my room.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's how I got my scores. So the bandwidth was really the time it took. I want to make an equivalency here, right? The bandwidth was essentially the time it took for the newspaper to get the information, print it in Manhattan, and then drive it on a highway to my house and then have some kid drop it off.
Yeah.
That was the bandwidth. But over time, and even during my childhood, we figured out how to send things up to satellites, and USA Today was born, which meant you could get any score for any team at any time, right? Because USA Today then could print in any neighborhood, and that was again increasing bandwidth. What had to change, right? I know what had to change on the trading side, but what had to change on the general business side to make all this real-time data possible so that the disk wasn't faster than the network? And when did that kind of intersect and change?
Yeah, it's a it's an evolution, right? It's not really a, I
Yep.
would say, an instantaneous change, but a few things came together. So see, disk bandwidth, give or take, mainstream disk bandwidth is a couple of gigs per second.
Okay.
And till about 10 years ago, mainstream data center networks, when we were deploying stuff there, were 1 gig per second. And you can achieve more by parallelizing, by putting more ports in there. But the wireline speed became 10 gigs per second in mainstream data centers. Again, investment banks were a bit faster, they could afford it, they needed it. But mainstream data centers, 7 to 10 years, 10 years I think would be reasonable to say that data centers started to become 10 gig, and that disk bandwidth is still is not 10 gigs per second mainstream. So as a result, network allows you to move much more data, so much so that with the 5 gig radio on your mobile phones, that itself is significant bandwidth. So that's
Yeah.
one trend that happened, right? Another important trend that happened associated with this is the entire evolution in mobile applications and smartphones. The way that the systems became very very distributed, that we've got like almost a supercomputer in our hands relative to the computer that's put man on the moon. So if you look at that in comparison, so you've got better compute in your hands, which is completely connected. Data center networks are much much better. And then lastly, the human need for evolution to keep making things better, the need for data to become real time, the impatience, in other words, we're all getting more and more impatient, right? Uh, you were probably happy to have that wait, that suspense for the scores for the newspaper to come to your house, and now it's like the moment I turn my phone on, the score has to be right on
Yeah, I want to see
there.
the highlights
Even
right away. Like, I'm not even satisfied with the score, but yeah, go ahead.
exactly, right? So I feel I feel very disconnected. I mean, I literally am. But when I'm in airplanes, like, what am I going to do now? Right? Because the network is slow. So you combine all of that, right? The need for applications, the need for humans to get this data, the underlying change in the network, the compute available to all of us in data centers, but also in the house and in the phone. So that distributed environments, and then add to that companies like AWS and then Microsoft and Ali Cloud and all of these companies, Google, basically making cloud a reality, making it secure enough with all the other capabilities that you can have your data in other people's data centers. And we've been using it with email. So when you bring all of those factors together, that's, I think, the reason why we can think of our architecture differently now and move information in real time.
I want to talk about real-time transfers in the finance world because that's where I understand them the best.
Yeah,
It always surprised me when I made a bank transfer that it took 2 days to clear
yeah,
when I was younger, or even when I was in university, But when I got into the finance world, I realized that like T plus two or T plus three was the thing that the banks actually had agreed upon for multiple reasons. One of them was probably throughput at the time. But I want to ask you this. We started dealing with real time data on trading desks about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, we had a ton more money to spend on building those systems. Again, did things get less expensive in relative terms over the last 15 or 20 years to make it possible for, just like a fast moving consumer goods company to get data in real time as well? Because we knew we could do it back then. We couldn't live without real time trading data. It was not possible to do. But FMCG companies have been able to live with it until maybe a few years ago. Again, did stuff just get so cheap that it just became possible?
Yeah, I think again it became cheap enough in relative terms, right? So the
Yep.
cost per byte of data, per gigabyte of data has been dropping, right? If you just look at your phone contract as well, right? I'm pretty
Fair
sure your
enough.
price is not multiplying in the same proportion that the bandwidth or the
Yeah, no
overall
way.
data packages, right? So we can
Right.
say that the cost of data transmission has been dropping, no doubt about that. But it's also, I think, the overall economy. If you see that the world economy has been growing, especially in the developed world, but now also in the developing world, GDP has been growing. So that means the overall wealth generation in the world, again, it's unfortunately not in an equilibrium. It's not fair,
Yep.
but in absolute terms, it has been growing. And as a result, normal people have phones. Like 20 years ago, who would have thought on the trading
Yeah,
floor? Like when the first, those big Nokia bricks and Blackberries were launched, they were a luxury.
I remember.
Now everybody has it. So it's a combination of all of that. And on the trading floor, see, banks made money by moving numbers. What
Yep.
products do banks have, right? They basically have the ability to store numbers and have assets and liabilities associated with those numbers. And if they could move that data quickly, they could act on it, they could buy and sell. The electronification of the exchanges of the ACNs away from people shouting in the well. Earlier, trading was like how quickly can you react to the voice in the well and how loud was it. So that's your bandwidth and latency.
Yeah.
That became uh, again electronified, and now you're on a network, and we kept on getting faster and faster. How quickly can you get closer to the well? 1 foot of cable is 1 nanosecond latency. So because if you,
Colocation.
collocation, exactly. So that's basically the I would say the crucible for event-driven architecture and
Yep.
moving data in real time.
So talk to me about how companies now are doing. What did you call it? Event driven.
Yeah,
What did you call it? I want to get the term
event-driven
right.
architecture or
Event driven
event.
architecture, and also flow, right? This idea of flow, and how does it move from this decentralized processes or creating decentralized processes from centralized processes? We talk about digital transformation a lot on this podcast,
Yeah.
but this is like digital transformation at scale.
Yes.
Real companies actually changing the way they interact with their data and moving from these really centralized things to a bunch of separate processes that are decentralized. Tell me what that means and how companies can actually go through this process.
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of examples from the
Please.
trading floor, and then I'll try to relate it back to FMCG companies or retailers. Like
Awesome.
trading floors, because that's where I learned it. That's where it started, in my opinion.
Yep.
And if you see any of the banks, right? So the banks that we work with, Royal Bank of Canada to Barclays, Deutsche Bank, Standard Chartered Bank, to name a few, uh, each one of them has an FX trading platform or an equities trading platform. And that's the front office. So they have to react to prices. They have to place, again, in simple speak, they have to place buy and sell orders. Once the orders are matched, then they get converted into trades, and these trades have to be settled. They have to be reported to regulators. So all of these interactions, when you place an order to buy something, that generates the price. When that order gets converted into a trade, each of these occurrences, these happenings, can be called events. So an event, again, the English translation of the word would be an occurrence, something that happens, right?
Yep.
And if you also look at it a bit more closely, uh, each of these actions is a combination of a noun plus a verb. So order
Go ahead.
created, order filled, order acknowledged, trade settled. It's always an object and an action. So
Yep.
that's what a definition of an event could be in simple literal terms, right? Not even in compute terms. So as you get these orders and trades and settlements done, they are all sent to different systems. right? The order management engine where your order book is going to be different from your trade settlement engines, is going to be different from your pricing engines, is going to
Yep.
be different from your regulatory engines, and they're not at the same place. Especially in FX trading, US dollar is US dollar, right? So it's moving in the US and I'm buying it in Singapore or selling it in Singapore. So there is a distribution requirement for these events that are happening. So what you need to make this happen, I mean, the need is real. It's a distributed, guaranteed delivery, low latency fabric that is needed to move all of this information in real time. And that's what we call the event mesh as a pattern. Solace is one of the providers of it, but that is
Yep.
the pattern. Now, if I take that into another industry, let's say we work with Unilever and a whole like Roche and a whole lot of retail companies like Schwartz. So all the little stores connect over us. We work with Nets, which is Singapore's national payment transfer
Yep.
system. All of these companies also have events. Like in the
Yeah.
case of Unilever, they talked about this study that when a ship moves in the ocean, that location update, again, noun verb, that's an event. And if you want to track soap in real time, like who cared about soap in real time until COVID hit? So
Yeah.
through
Exactly.
COVID, became a life-saving commodity. So now you want to track soap in real time. Is it on the Walmart shelf or not, or where is it? So applying the same principle of order created to location update. And by the way, FMCG companies and retailers, they also have orders. So
Yeah.
point of sale systems and
I mean, restaurants have orders, right, as well.
orders.
So
Payments are
yeah.
also orders. So what
Yep.
if you mobilize these orders in real time rather than writing it to a store-based disk and then updating the inventory in a non-real-time manner and people don't know where the goods are in what store? The
Right.
same principles of the event mesh go into different kinds of systems like SAP or Oracle or supply chain systems. So that's the evolution.
Can you talk about what an event mesh is for people that don't necessarily understand it?
Yeah. So an event mesh is a data movement fabric, right?
Okay.
So it's
Yep.
a network, but it's the layer between the network and the applications. So if I explain it a little bit further, event broker is this technology that allows you to move data in a one to many manner, in a publish to subscribe manner, right?
Got it.
So for example, if an order is created and we say that order event is published to the event broker, that order may have to go to the order management system. It may also go to the digital receipt system. It may also go to the loyalty system. So the
Got it.
same order has to go to multiple systems. And this pattern is called publish subscribe, which is done by an event broker. Now, if you have multiple event brokers networked with each other, some in Singapore, some in US, some in Frankfurt, some in Mumbai, and as you connect them, now you create a mesh of event brokers, which is called an event mesh. So like one
Got it.
big logical event broker for publish, subscribe, guaranteed delivery, etc.
Okay. I have a question for you, and I think very few people could answer this question, but I'm pretty sure you can.
Ooh, no
So,
pressure.
don't worry, there's no math. Not that that would bother you for sure.
Yeah.
But I remember when we first started getting digital connectivity to the exchange,
Yeah.
right? And that was fun because it made trading a lot easier. We had data coming in. We could do analysis faster. We could do analysis using computers as opposed to just kind of our gut feel or writing stuff down or using a Monroe calculator to calculate bond prices, right? Made it much easier when we had a wire to the exchange that gave us real-time data. One of the things that we figured out was it now could be easier for us to take orders. This is where you talk about
Mm.
order given, order taken from our clients and acknowledge those orders. If we built an interface ourselves, whether in the fixed income space, in the FX space, or in the equity space, to be able to understand the orders that they were sending us. And I think each individual broker went out and then built themselves a system. I know we built one, you'll laugh at this. We built a system at Deutsche that we called SMTM.
Mm.
And that was shorthand for show me the money. But anyway, it was an individual system, and it meant that every one of our clients, yeah, it was that funny. But it meant that every one of our clients then had to build a bespoke connection just to us so that they could then communicate with the parameters and the inputs that we had for SMTM. The financial services industry got together and created something called the FIX protocol, right? The financial information exchange protocol. And it meant that everybody then that was on FIX could send any order to any person, and any broker could receive an order from any buy-side entity.
Yep.
And that essentially changed the whole tenor because it meant that now it was just as easy to send an order to, a third tier broker as it was to send it to Goldman Sachs.
Yep.
Now, I'm curious if you're seeing this same evolution happen, because whether Levi's is ordering something or Zara is ordering something, it's still they're ordering fabric, needles and stuff like that, or sending an order to a factory. Has anybody built a kind of fixed protocol for those industries as well? And if they haven't, do you see that happening? Because the data is the same and the real-time analysis on all this could be the same as well, yeah?
Yeah, I'll try to unwrap this. I think what you've said, the way that I understand this, is two, three tiers, right?
Yep,
It's very intriguing, and we should follow that, right? So the fixed protocol does transport as well, but it's essentially a payload standard, right? So that
yep,
the
yep.
way
You're going to
that
send me stuff and I'm just going to get it. And then I don't care what order you send it to me, and it has this tag on it.
yeah,
When we see that tag, we put it here in our order system or whatever, and we
that's right.
understand what that is,
Yeah.
regardless of how you send it, yeah?
And it's universally understood. And as a result,
Yep,
companies like QuickFix and Cameron Fix, which we work with, basically were able to build fix engines, and
yep,
anybody could, right?
yep.
So, but that's a payload standard, right? But how does that data actually flow between the banks? How does that data flow between the exchange and the bank or any other providers? So, in the first place, we are saying standards are great, right? Because it unlocks a lot of innovation. But then standards are also tiered. At the pure network level, the standard is TCP/IP. Imagine if
Yep.
there was no TCP/IP. But then
Right.
at the transport, at the messaging and eventing space, there are standards like GMS historically, or REST, or MQTT, or AMQP. And these are the standards for publish, subscribe of that data one to many, or replay, or guaranteed delivery, or
Right.
everything that is to do with that data transport. So three layers of standards: TCP at the network level, JMS, REST, AMQP, MQTT at the messaging level, which we support all of them, and
Right.
then Fix, or in the payments world, Swift as a
Swift.
standard,
Right.
which is pretty much the same. And in the recent Swift implementations, especially of the MH, and as banks are moving from ISO 83 to 20 or 22, Swift is also, it used to only connect to IBM MQ. Now it connects to any GMS and any MQP broker. So we've got customers actually leveraging our backbone as a mesh rather than just a queuing system with Swift. But when it comes to retail, as you mentioned, Levi's and all of that, I think there will be a standard there. I think we are
Right.
moving in that direction. There was an attempt to do some of that with blockchain, but there are practical challenges by putting this volume on a blockchain.
Yeah.
But
Throughput.
what I've seen, I come from India originally. So India has this initiative called the ONDC, which is exactly that. It's a standardization of the supply chain, so that any small medium enterprise producing anything in the countryside can actually advertise their catalog and their products and their orders, and have like a open standards based logistics backbone for the entire country. So
Interesting.
getting there.
But this is very similar to what India's done in the payment space as well, right? Creating the payment rails. Like, come on, refresh my memory. I can't remember off the top of my head. Say it again.
UPI. So
Yeah, UPI, right?
UPI
So
is
the Universal Payments Interface. So same thing, and I love the fact that they're doing this, because what it's done in India is the same thing you're talking about for small merchant. I mean, for small producers, is that it's given even the tiniest merchant the ability to take a digital payment, so that it doesn't. What's the right word? It doesn't bifurcate the skill set that a massive entity can have, and just like a mom and pop shop in a small town or a third tier city can have. And UPI is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and they've democratized it. And Singapore has something similar. So we've got
Yeah.
Singapore SGQR, and I've had the pleasure of working very closely with that, because again, 110,000 terminals and the entire backbone runs on Solace. So it's a very public story of
Good
ours.
for you.
And the interesting thing is that, see, this is what standards and eventing as a pattern of real-time data movement does.
Yeah.
Now, from Singapore, we have end-to-end connectivity with RuPay and UPI in India. So actually, I
Right. Right.
could transfer money from Singapore to any Indian phone number through that mesh, and similarly with Thailand with Prompt Pay. So
Yep.
payments, while they were national, there's already international examples which are live, and again, logistics would head in that direction as well. And you know what intrigues me?
Tell me.
Imagine this logistics backbone. So we deploy our technology a lot in supply chain, right? Goods movements and shipments, and
Right. Right.
whether it's land, sea, air, anything, right? Everything is an event at the end of the day. Imagine taking that world and mixing it with the bank world, while the banks are also real time. And imagine what this could do with trade finance, and trade finance without the need for collateral. Because if the bank knows that this small medium enterprise is actually supplying sugar to Unilever, who's making ice cream,
Right.
the risk profile for this customer, just by having that visibility into the event stream of his orders and his manufacturing, opens up great possibilities for trade finance.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Because without the connectivity between those two verticals, that small merchant may look like a gigantic risk.
Yeah.
But understanding that supply chain connectivity and the customer and the provider implications, it means that you're creating financial inclusion at scale, right? In a way that didn't seem possible before you were able to run this kind of event driven real time data infrastructure, no?
Yeah, and the impact it has on businesses as well as human lives, right? So,
Yeah,
one of the first projects I did in my life was I built the procurement system for Singapore. I was a part of the tendering team, and it was probably the first, if not one of the first, electronic tendering systems. In this is going back 2000, 2001, I think. And what we observed after launching that was that the price of photocopying, of all things, the price of photocopying, the price of pencils at which the government was procuring
right.
went down 10 times.
Had to.
Yeah, because
Almost by definition, because the market that they were addressing from a purchasing standpoint must have gotten broader, which means that there was more competition, so that the
exactly.
prices for that stuff had to drop. Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
And they had new suppliers as a result, right? So all of a
That's the
sudden,
point. Yep,
you've got a lot of diversity in the supply chain and competition leads to innovation. Everybody, of course, there were some losers, people who had set
for
up
sure.
shop just downstairs
Yep,
from the ministries, but democratization and disruption is generally a good thing.
agreed. I, I don't want to get back to this idea. You talked about fairness at the beginning, right? You said GDP in the world has been growing, although unevenly. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about that. But essentially, what you're talking about is connecting all these systems to each other. I mean, we talk about democratization a lot of the financial system.
Yeah.
This has to, whether anybody wants it to or not, or whether it's happening purposely or not, almost by definition, it's going to happen because of all this connectivity that you're creating. No,
Absolutely, and again, see, connectivity is one thing, but when you can tune into data. So when you're putting those nouns and verbs, so when you say payment slash initiated or order slash created,
right?
the power of an event-driven approach, the power of an event mesh is that distributing it globally, if you want, or wherever the brokers are, in a one-to-many manner without any performance implications, practically speaking. So that means newer participants or analytics engines or AI capabilities can just connect to it, tune in, and do interesting things with it. And when you do that, the insights that you discover, the actions that you will take on the back of it, will bring efficiencies never seen before because you have access to real time data whenever you want.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time talking about income arbitrage and salary arbitrage, and I think that over time, the things that you're discussing are going to change the salary arbitrage as well. And I do think that salary is going to revert to the mean. If nothing else, we should see salaries in the developing world come up higher to match, not to match, but to get closer to those in the developed world, and vice versa. The salaries in the developed world drop because that arbitrage is going to have to close, and it doesn't close in a unilateral way. So that's interesting to me as well. No,
Yeah,
you're smiling at me.
I'm sensitive to the human side of it, right? Because there's also
So
that
am I.
purchasing power parity angle. So I mean, we want a fair world, but I hope all of that eventually leads to us being all citizens of one big global village, and the equality starts getting better. But
Yeah,
we're heading in that direction, right? I mean, when I was growing up,
I
I
agree.
never would have imagined in my mind that I would sitting in Singapore someday working for a global company,
Right,
working for a Canadian company in a very diverse environment. So it's already happening. I'm a
right.
product of that. I'm experiencing that.
Yeah, so am I. I mean, there was no way in the world that I would ever consider that I was going to be living in Bangkok in my life. Some little kid from California and Connecticut. So in a way, we've kind of crossed paths, but I
Yeah.
think to the same result. I want to ask you this: if you have any specific like customer success stories from the stuff that you're talking about, maybe maybe improving it, their operational efficiency and even their customer satisfaction.
Yeah, so customer satisfaction, we've got a bunch of them, right? So I think I've not touched on telco as a domain, so maybe I'll talk about that a little. So we've engaged with telcos in Southeast Asia, South
Okay.
Asia, India, because those are massive populations, and as a result,
Mm.
the loads on the telco systems are quite huge. And
Yeah.
when I say load, just a simple action of topping up your prepaid phone, and these are predominantly prepaid markets. We're also
Right.
doing stuff on the postpaid side related to customer experience. But when you say you want to top up your phone with, 20,000 rupiah or 500 rupees, we do this with Airtel, we do this with Jio in India, we do this with XL Axiata in Indonesia. And uh, the problem statement many years ago when we started working with them was that this going to the dealer and topping up that balance to seeing the benefits would take many minutes, sometimes half an hour, sometimes longer, right?
Yeah.
So you've done the recharge and the minutes are not getting added, or the voice, the SMS is not getting added. So how do you solve that problem from a customer experience standpoint, right? And there was a public talk that the CIO of XL Axiata gave a few years ago, where she was talking about how their net promoter scores were suffering because of this. And as they became event driven, and of course with Solace, but that act of the top up is also an event. So when you
Yeah.
say top ups slash started or initiated, right? And then
Mm.
because it's one to many, because it's publish subscribe, and you can tune in using, even for the technical audience, wildcards, the voice system would tune into the packages that have voice. The data systems would have data, and similarly, the SMS systems would have tuned into their appropriate package, and they would add the benefits as quickly as they could. So we parallelize the entire processing, and as a result, we are able to add these benefits faster. So I think Airtel CIO made a statement that as a result of this event-driven approach, 97.5% of the top-ups happened in, or the benefits were extended in less than 5 seconds, and
Yeah.
at India scale. So we are talking 20 to 20, 30,000 top-ups happening per second. But then it doesn't stop there, right? So that's on one hand the customer experience. Add agility to it. Now the telco goes and signs up with Netflix or Amazon Prime, and they start to offer that service.
Right.
Nothing changes in their integration, because guess what? The order event is already on the mesh. You just bring a little Netflix consumer, and that Netflix consumer tunes into the packages that have been added to Netflix, probably even in a different location, and maybe it's a REST endpoint, and that's it. You just start unlocking new services. So the time to market, the innovation, the ability to launch a product faster, uh, basically comes down to weeks, sometimes less than that.
So Netflix is a really good example of this, but they're a digital first company,
Yeah,
right? So for them to integrate event driven stuff into their business, they had to do it just to exist,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
But tell me this, how hard is it, or what are the challenges for a company that's not digital first, but knows that it has to? Because I never even thought about this idea of the top up being an event driven thing. And I remember walking away from my telco. I pay on a monthly basis. I'm
Yeah,
prepaid, but I still pay every month, right? And I remember walking away. I missed my payment because I was traveling for like 6 weeks, and I came back and I was like, oh, I forgot to pay my phone bill. It's okay. I just go to the store and I pay it. But they're like, give it about 15 minutes and you'll be back online.
yeah.
And I was like, 15 minutes? You get my money right away,
Uh,
and I'm waiting 15 minutes. Now, it was faster than that. But they must be running, again, some sort of back end event driven system too, that as soon as somebody puts that payment into the system, I get my coverage back. Yeah.
yeah, or if it took 15 minutes, it probably is a micro batch. Maybe it's
Yeah.
not.
It's a micro batch. Yeah.
It's
But
not.
but that
Yeah,
makes it so interesting.
yeah,
So
exactly.
so Netflix again is a good example of a company that was digital first. But how do companies that aren't digital first go through this process?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting point, right? That okay, I really want it, but how do I get started?
Yeah.
Brick and mortar company, or I've got API first as an approach, which served us really well, and now it's the time for the next wave, which is event driven, or I'm service oriented, or I'm just siloed, right? So the way that we work with customers, so we have a methodology. It's called event storming. Others use it as well, but we do these event driven workshops where we make you think of your use cases where you have customer experience challenges or agility or insights challenges, and we
Right.
break it up into events. And as you mentioned, top up is an event. When you open a door, that's an event. And when you
Yeah.
close a door, when you lock a door, again, nouns and verbs. And in Singapore, we connect all the buses, and when the door of the bus opens, that's an event, and it's a pretty important one. We connect the entire airspace for the US, for Canada, for Singapore, for Europe. When the wheels go up in a plane, it's a pretty significant event because now
Yeah.
the plane is going on cruise, and you can do interesting things with it. So many enterprises are doing this in an event driven manner, and many of these industries are very legacy. So what
Yep.
we do is we opportunistically look for projects that are in flight, and through that, for systems that were never defined or never made event driven, there are adapters. So the event mesh, the platform that we have, has connectors, or we call them micro integrations. They sit at the edge of the mesh, and they will make the legacy event driven by either, like, making a fast micro batching architecture, or even evented connectors. But then your newer systems that you're building, or as you're upgrading, make them event native, so that you're not just hung with adapters. You're progressing to a much more seamless data movement as you go.
When I was trading stocks, I used to run through Tokyo with one of my buddies when we were both on the trading desk. And we would play this little game of, if we saw a sign for a company that was listed, we would try to guess its stock code or try to remember its stock code, which we could know, like 7203 Toyota, 7267 is Honda, I think, and I haven't looked at this in 15 years, right? Maybe 6758 is Sony. Like, I can't remember for sure.
You could go.
But it's like, am I wrong? I think I'm right, actually. But like, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
What was 6991? Anyway, it doesn't matter. But my point is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Do you have the same experience, like when you're like driving around Singapore or walking through Singapore with your family? You're like, when that door opens, that light goes on, and the back end, I did, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean?
You have to talk to my kids about it. They make fun of me. I'm a passionate person. That must be running on Solace. I said, yeah.
Right? They're like, Dad, come on. I just want some ice
I do
cream.
it. But yeah, especially like out here, we get to see it, right? The port is connected, and it's a fully autonomous port in
Yeah.
Singapore now, and
Yep.
that port, again, everything that moves on the port is an event. So, for example, if a truck moves, if a truck doesn't get its events every 15 seconds, it has to stop because it doesn't know whether it's
What
moving.
to do? Yeah.
Yeah, what to do, right? And that's a very interesting proposition, because you cannot have that event go from the port finger to the cloud and back, because it's too slow. If you
Yeah.
really wanted the truck to stop, or the crane containers are crossing, you want to take action, the speed of light matters. So in that case,
Yeah.
these event
Yeah.
brokers are sitting on the port finger. So you're doing very low latency publish subscribe between the various machines, but then they're also going up to the data centers, or sometimes to the cloud, because again, one to many, the feed can go to many other systems. So your OT world is integrated with your IT world. So the patterns are, again, similar. The use cases are very varied.
So can I ask you this? When you go through this event storming, which I love this word, by the way, event storming,
Yeah,
whoever came up with it, they should get some kind of marketing prize.
yeah,
But when you go through this event storming, you're obviously doing it with companies that you're not necessarily working with yet. It must be the case that when you're going through it and you're actually writing, because I did this on the trading desk, right? Again, when Fix was implemented, we could do so many more things because we didn't have to think about confirming the stock codes, the buy or sell, or the share amounts, right?
yeah.
Those were already done for us. So what other things could we do, right? Those events got taken care of on their own. So when you're going through this event storming, do you have clients realize, I never thought about that as an event, but if I knew that already, then I can do this or give these three other choices. And they have these little like micro epiphanies as well that maybe changes the way they deliver their product and even price their product. Do you see that happening too?
All the time. And I mean, it's such a pleasure to be in that workshop, right? Because we learn a lot.
Yeah.
So like this happened, for example, with Unilever, and again, they wrote a beautiful blog about it. And recently Gartner's done a very nice case study on them for supply chain, where while they started with location events, right? So you want to track soap as an example, and that system became from non-real time to real time. uh, they they then used that in a very interesting way when the Suez Canal crisis happened. So remember when the
Yep.
Ever Given got stuck in the canal, it disrupted the global supply chain. So I think
Yep.
Unilever, if I remember correctly, in 1.5 hours were able to deal with the situation, to see which ships are going in alternative
Yeah.
paths, which ships
Yep.
are going to be left to wait. And the beauty of the events is they did not just look at the location event, or as a result the price impact of that. They also had emissions event on the mesh, that what
Interesting.
is going to be the impact of rerouting the ships in a particular way on the carbon footprint, because shipping is the sixth worst culprit on for emissions if you were to compare it with countries.
Fair
So
enough.
that's, again, we never thought of that. But
Yeah.
in that discussion with the head of supply chain back then, they were saying that, oh, if location is an event, isn't port source change an event? Is it port destination change an event? Isn't carrier booking an event? Is an emissions an event? And there are 52 such events, or 50 something events. I can't remember the specifics on the mesh just for tracking supply chain.
I want to say this and then I'll let you go. I've done thousands of recordings for the Asia Tech podcast and my other podcasts on this platform. And I would say at the most, like 7 of the recordings that I've done have fundamentally changed the way I've thought about looking at businesses. I'm not kidding. This is definitely one of them, if not in the top 3. Because the more I think about this, the more I think it impacts everything that we do. You're right. Every little step you take is an event. Like when I go downstairs in my condo, there's a monitor up above that unlocks the door without me doing anything. That's an event. So that means that some system knows that someone's coming in, actually going out, because it knows where I'm located as well. On the way in, when I swipe my card, that's an event because it also knows now the door's opening the other way because I'm coming in.
Yeah.
It's just going to fundamentally change the way any business thinks about the way they do business when they unlock everything into these little pieces. Again, I told you I did this on the trading desk. I was the one who actually sat down when we implemented Fix and said, all of these things are going on. What of them can we eliminate from having to think about? And then during the time when we don't have to think about that, what new things can we think about to make our business more efficient and more profitable? And I'll tell you this, just so you can understand impact, or so the listeners can understand impact, we took a business at Goldman Sachs, and by putting technology onto it, a lot of it event-driven, and took it from an $8 million a year business to a $135 million a year business. It matters.
Impressive. Yeah. And see, you're absolutely right. If you change your thinking, the impacts could be pretty dramatic, right? So
Yeah.
I always encourage people to think event driven, and there's good reason for that, right? See, we all, especially people who grew up as programmers, we almost have to unlearn the way that we were thinking for a very
Yeah.
specific reason. For the longest time, we were taught, and we still are taught, because that's the right thing to do, function calls, right? We were taught modules, Fortran 7.7, we were taught go-to statements. Like, it's all about how do you break your code into smaller pieces and make it modular.
Yep.
And the modularization from function calls became remote procedure calls or objects, and then that evolved into APIs. But what's common in all of that is they are point-to-point, one-to-one interactions.
Right.
So it's ingrained through school, through most of us, unless you've experienced this on the trading floor, and we didn't invent it. I mean, there were giants who've innovated topic routing and publish, subscribe, or subject-based addressing. We just do it pretty well. I would argue we're the best. I mean, that's why I work here. But
Fair enough.
but that whole thought process of point-to-point interactions has taken us to API first. But now, with all the physics changing and systems becoming distributed, we can think in more natural terms. Like when it
Yeah.
rains, it's an event. It's not an API call. So if you think of it differently, what can you do if you listen to that event? And then technically, the mesh moves those events. And then also what I didn't talk about in, like, as we reimagine our integration, and that's our theme, uh, you have to catalog those events, and we have the ability from our perspective in the platform where okay, the event exists, nobody knows. So like you have an API catalog, how do you go and look for events, how do you go
Right.
and then use those events, right? So that's the entire ecosystem. Think events, move events, catalog events, unlock innovation.
That is the perfect way to end. Sumeet Puri, the Chief Technology Solutions Officer at Solace. I think I said it better this time, but there are a lot of S's there. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time today.
My pleasure, Michael. Thanks for having me, and I really enjoyed the conversation. We'll hopefully see you in Bangkok sometime or in Singapore.
Absolutely.
Yeah.